We want to interrupt our discussion with David Begnaud. We have some new rulings from the Supreme Court. The justices have decided on several cases involving congressional districts and gerrymandering. The court will not rule, though, on President Trump's so-called travel ban. So with us now on the phone is Jessica Levinson. She's a professor at Loyola Law School to talk us through some of these things. So let's start with first the decision by the court to not rule on the travel ban today. A lot of people were expecting that. What's your take?
I actually think that we shouldn't have expected that yet. It was heard on the last day of oral arguments, and so we're still clearing out cases from, as of Thursday, there are still some decisions for cases that were heard in November, December. It will shock absolutely no one to know that the travel ban is a highly contentious decision, and so all we know is that we'll get it by the end of the week. Reading the tea leaves for the Supreme Court, which is always an exceedingly dangerous business, would indicate that at least Chief Justice John Roberts might try and find a narrow way to get out of a big substantive decision on the travel ban, and a compromise like that could take time.
So moving on to another court case, I think everyone remembers that Colorado baker who refused to make a cake for a same-sex couple. The court actually sided with that baker. But now the court is also sort of weighing in on a very similar issue with a florist. The court sent that case back to the lower courts. What can you tell us about that decision?
Yeah, so this is exactly what the Supreme Court would do if, like the case in the Baker case, they basically want to say to the lower courts, you try and figure that out and then bring it back to us. And the decision that they made with respect to the Colorado versus the Masterpiece cake shop was really interesting because they said, we're voting for the baker, but only because he didn't have a fair shake below. Only because when the Colorado board heard his grievance, they made religiously insensitive comments to him. So they didn't address, and they really aggressively dodged, that big issue of what do we do when someone's religious beliefs clash with our desire to uphold anti-discriminatory state laws. And so sending the florist case back down is kind of part of the same theme, saying, lower courts, you try and figure it out. We didn't give you a lot of guidance. The court is going to have to at some point weigh in on this because it's one of the big cases that's coming up, particularly after a few years ago, the gay marriage case. We all knew these were going to be the next cases.
And Jessica, let me ask you about this one. The Supreme Court is also choosing not to take on a new case with regards to partisan redistricting for now. They are sending that dispute over North Carolina's heavily Republican congressional district map back to a lower court for more work. Why is that happening?
Well, I think that's happening because of what we saw last Thursday when the Supreme Court had two great chances to decide we don't have the answers to these questions for partisan gerrymandering. Can the federal court even hear these cases, meaning is it justiciable? And what is the standard to review that? There were two cases that the court heard this term. Everybody was looking to say, okay, now we're finally going to know when you draw voting district lines, how far is too far when it comes to keeping political power? And the court last week said, we don't know. And basically they dismissed both cases for procedural reasons. So I think it's not a surprise that they're doing the same thing now with respect to North Carolina because all signs indicate they're not prepared to make those decisions. Can federal courts hear these cases? And what's the standard to determine when too much of a political power grab goes too far?
So, Jessica, before we let you go, I want to ask you about a case that would be of particular interest to fans of the Netflix series Making a Murderer. They will recall Brendan Dassey. He's a 16-year-old that confessed to participating in the rape and murder of a woman. And if you watched it, you may have felt like he got railroaded. I'm not going to say whether he did it or not. Right. But so his case has been winding its way up to the Supreme Court. What's going on with that?
Well, I hate to give you this answer, but I think that we don't know yet. So the court is still populating its docket for next term. I know that that's a very popular case because for the reasons that you talked about, there's going to be a lot of criminal justice cases. It's actually exceedingly heavy criminal justice term for the 2018 to 2019, and then we'll be able to know more.
All right. Well, the cliffhanger continues,
right? Exactly. A lot of people feel very strongly about that.
Sorry for not giving you more.
Yeah, no, it's okay. Jessica Levinson, thank you so much.
Thank you.
We're going to